Welcome. Let's talk about the third part of the economic survey. Under this part, we would be focusing on 5 chapters from economic survey, and these pertain to agriculture, industry, services, external trade, and the digital infrastructure, one of the very important topics. Now, in the field of agriculture, we have been focusing on firstly organic farming. The second is the mechanization in the farm, providing the agricultural credit to the farmers, the various initiatives and the schemes being released by the government, Sarkar Se Samriddhi, that is from cooperation to prosperity, the development of the various allied sectors like animal husbandry, dairy, fishery. Then we focus on food security. For food security, organic farming, Paramparagat Krishi Vikas Yojana, and then Mission Organic Value Chain Development for Northeast region, specifically for Northeast. The various cluster and the farmer organization systems have been implemented. The Fasal Bima Yojana is an aerial approach, area-based approach. So we talk about two types of approach, area-based and target-based, as we have covered under our GS course. So this is an area-based approach. Then 2023 is a millet, International Year of Millet. So here we have a map indicating in which areas which kind of millets grow. For example, in the regions of Ladakh, it is the pearl millet. In the regions of South, we have most of the millets. For example, the Proso millet, little millet, Kodo millet, brown top millet, barnyard millet. So those are some of the common millets which are grown in India, and this is overall millet map of India. Very, very important to note. The next is in the field of animal husbandry. Our Animal Husbandry Infrastructure Development Fund in 2020 was released with a 3% interest subvention to the borrower and a credit guarantee up to 25% of the total borrowing. A new national cooperation policy has been released, and this talks about cooperation and the residential commissioners who are coming for the purpose, and this has a true potential for cooperative sectors. Now this introduced a multi-state cooperative society bill in 2022, which talks about bringing amendments to strengthen the cooperative movement in India, provisions related to the reforms, strengthening of the governance, transparency in the cooperative sector, and how to raise the funds for the cooperative sector. The next is the industry and the steady growth in the industry. If we talk about the FDI, the foreign direct investment equity inflow, we see a very high inflow in the sectors on services, computer softwares, and a significant proportion in trading. And then the remaining sectors do have their share, as we can see. Then one very important topic is incentives being provided to semiconductors. US had a scheme which is known as the US Creating Helpful Incentives to Produce Semiconductors and Science Act 2022, which was called as the Chips and Science Act 2022. Now this talked about bringing in more implementations for domestic semiconductor manufacturing in United States. The country produces only 10% of the semiconductors in the world and relies on East India for import. Now for the scheme, to get a support to India, we need to have semiconductor fabrication labs in India. So 50% of the firm's capital expenditure, financial support, and 2.5% of the R&D support. For display fabs, 50% of the capex firms financial support, and 2.5% of the scheme overlay. And then we also talk about the facilities for assembling, testing, marketing, along with the outsourced semiconductor assembly, both of them at the same rate. Similarly, there are various schemes for pharma companies as well. So one is the critical scheme that talks about employment generation from 51 different projects. The next is the medical devices, which talks about employment generation in the field of medical devices, and the core pharmaceuticals, which have nearly 55 different projects, and 1 lakh people getting direct or indirect jobs through the pharmaceutical section. If we talk about Make in India 2.0, which are the sectors which we focus? So here is a complete list as has been released by the DPIIT, which is furnitures, AC, agrochemicals, steel, ceramics, setup boxes, toys, gym equipments, which will fall under Make in India 2.0. The next is the various incentives for the development of innovation. So Atal Innovation Mission, the Nidhi scheme, which is the national initiative for developing and harnessing innovations, the funds for startup, credit guarantee scheme for providing the seeding support and the successive credit needs. Then there's a terminology which is flipping. Now flipping is an important concept, extremely important for your prelims this time. Flipping is where the ownership gets transferred to an overseas entity, and this would transfer all the intellectual property rights. It would also transfer all the data of the Indian company. Now this effectively transforms an Indian company into a 100% subsidiary of a foreign entity, and this is where the concept of flipping is called as. Now some of the countries there is no withholding of the tax. For example, United Arab Emirates. Similarly, in Netherlands there is just 5% of the threshold. However, if a company is migrating to India, it would trigger a capital gains. So the pre-flipping scenario would witness, be it a resident or a non-resident, it would be liable to the Indian company, but in a post-flipping it would go to a foreign entity and then to an Indian company, and this is how the flipping process has taken place. However, in certain countries, reverse flipping has also been witnessed. The next is services. Under the services, we have the various subsector performance, which is again important. But some of the important schemes, for example, Nidhi for hospitality industry, Sathi for hospitality industry again, RCS Udan 3, which talks about regional connectivity through air connectivity, and then we have a scheme which is the loan guarantee scheme for COVID affected tourism service sector, and this would provide COVID affected regions with ability to restart their businesses. Under the external sector, we talk about the exchange rate, the fluctuations in the export import, and as we can see, these are the provisional data, but there has been a significant increase in the imports during the pandemic period, and this import curve has been rising. The export curve has not increased significantly, and therefore we have seen a declining trade balance. However, the third quarter of this the last financial year was relatively better. Now there have been various circulars which have been issued. One is by the RBI that talks about the arrangements for the INR to promote growth, and that is to open a rupee Vostro account. Now what is Vostro and Nostro? Extremely important for your this year examination, the same as flipping concept, and we have covered Vostro Nostro in a separate video, so don't miss that, refer that completely. The Vostro account is a domestic account that holds a foreign bank in a domestic bank currency, and that is the rupee currency. So this is how a special rupee Vostro account would be opened for the trading partners and those authorized dealers in India. The next is Krishi Udan scheme, that is to promote the agriculture in the remote tribal hilly belts and bring in the connectivity and bring in the agricultural produce through the air means. The next is maintaining the exchange rate within a fixed range so as to maintain liquidity and absorb the shocks in certain cases. So if we talk about the debt ratio, we can see that the foreign exchange reserves as a percentage of debt is very high in India in compared to countries like Mexico, Brazil, Indonesia, but China does has a further higher figures than us. Also, China has a very high proportion of short-term debt in contrast to India, where our proportion of short-term debt is relatively less. So if we talk about the overall debt, okay, overall external debt as a proportion of GNI, it is extremely high for countries like Vietnam and Brazil, but India does not have that high figure, so that's a good indicator indeed. Coming on to the next is digital infrastructure. Now there are various developments in the field of digital infrastructure. NPCI and the developments under NPCI are important. So the National Payment Corporation of India has focused on UPI, which is Unified Payment Gateway or Interface, which has transformed the payment system in the world in India, and now India has become a third position in the world after US and China in terms of digital payments. We do have the Gujarat International Finance Tech City, which has been established as Gift City, and the International Financial Service Center has been developed. A national infrastructure pipeline project has been released, which talks about betterment of the infrastructure projects, and up to nearly 111 lakh crores have been invested under the same. Similarly, a national monetization pipeline has been announced where asset creation through monetization has been the idea. For infrastructure initiatives, Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik, Then we have Bharatmala, Sagarmala, E-Sanchit, Single Window Transfer, SWIFT scheme, ICE Gate scheme, Torrent Customs scheme. Under the logistics, we have seen the achiever states are UP, Tamil Nadu, Uttarakhand, Telangana. Aspirers are Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Goa and the related states. Then besides that, in the infrastructure, we have seen development of Mumbai-Ahmedabad high-speed rail, which is under the Mahasar project, dedicated freight corridors, which is the two corridors, the east and the west corridors, Gati Shakti terminals which are being established using the private players, high speed Vande Bharat trains, which are semi high speed self propellant trains prepared by the Integral Coach Factory at Chennai, and they do have an onboarded GPS system, electronic interlocking system with a centralized operation for rail safety, Hyperloop technology brought by IIT Madras, and this is by the help of linear induction motors and electromagnets. Bringing in Kisan Rail trains, inland vessels 1917 has undergone the amendments, and we have the new Inland Vessels 2021 Act which has been brought. Some of the important ideas under it is a centralized database, standardization of the qualification training and the training institutes, the standardization for environmental pollution markers, a constitution of a development fund for emergency preparedness, and declaration of the notified area as a zone depending on the wave height criteria which has been prescribed, and the propellant vessels that would be entering the water. So those are some of the important aspects. Based on this edition, this third part, three very important topics for your prelims. One is talking about the Vostro and the Nostro, which we have covered in a separate video. Flipping and reverse flipping, extremely important, a sure shot question for this year's prelims. The next is the Inland Vessel Act 2021, the developments under it, the cooperation, the new cooperation policy that has been brought, which is again important, and the sections from social and climate change, social infrastructure climate change, which we have covered in the second part. A lot of GS topics which pertain to economics, the basics of economics, the fluctuations in the macroeconomic cycles, the macroeconomic stability we have covered in our complete GS lectures. The link for those are available in the description below. Wish you very good luck. Thanks for joining in. We'll be bringing the budget details definitely soon. Wish you good luck.